In the autumn of 1944, a Luftwaffe fighter controller in Western Germany stared at his plotting table and tried to make sense of what his pilots were telling him over the radio. One American aircraft. One damaged American aircraft trailing smoke, flying erratically, clearly in trouble. His pilots had it surrounded, and yet in the space of 7 minutes, 4 of his men were falling out of the sky. He wrote 2 words in his operational log that night. 2 words that no history book has ever quoted in full. What made a crippled American fighter so impossible to kill? Before this video is over, you will understand exactly what those 2 words were, and why a Luftwaffe fighter controller buried them in a classified report that wouldn't surface for decades. This story isn't in the popular histories, it isn't in the museum placards. What it is found in are the operational records of the 56th Fighter Group, in the surviving mission debriefs held at the Air Force Historical Research Agency at Maxwell Air Force Base, and in the post-war interrogation transcripts of German pilots who faced American fighters in the skies over the Reich and lived to describe what they encountered. Primary sources. The enemy's own words, and when you hear what the Luftwaffe controller actually wrote in that log, the full sentence, not the sanitized version, you will understand why this story was quietly set aside, and why the pilot at the center of it flew home to an America that never fully grasped what he had done. To understand what happened in those 7 minutes, you have to understand the precise strategic situation over Northwest Europe in the fall of 1944. The date was October 15, 1944. The Allied breakout from Normandy was complete. Patton's Third Army was pressing toward the Moselle. The Market Garden operation had failed 6 weeks earlier, and the front had stabilized along a ragged line from the Dutch coast down through the Hurtgen forest. The Germans had not collapsed. They had contracted, drawing their fighter strength back to defend the Reich itself, concentrating their remaining experienced pilots into units that were better rested, better positioned, and fighting over their own territory. Home field advantage in air combat is not a metaphor. A German pilot who bailed out over Germany could be back in the cockpit in 48 hours. An American pilot who bailed out was a prisoner of war. For the United States Army Air Forces, the strategic calculus was simple and brutal. The 8th Air Force was conducting deep penetration raids on German oil refineries, rail yards, and synthetic fuel plants. These missions required fighter escort all the way to the target and all the way back. The aircraft doing that, escorting the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-51 Mustang, were not flying in a permissive environment. They were flying against the most experienced surviving cadre of Luftwaffe pilots. Men who had been flying combat since Spain or since Poland. Men who had accumulated thousands of hours of actual air combat experience. The 56th Fighter Group, flying out of Boxted in Essex, England, was one of the premier Thunderbolt outfits in the 8th Air Force. Their commanding officer at the time was Colonel David Schilling, a man with 22.5 aerial victories to his name, one of the highest totals in the entire European theater. The group flew the P-47D, the so-called Razorback variant, powered by the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. That engine mattered enormously. It would matter on October 15th more than anyone expected. The pilot you need to know is First Lieutenant Harold Hal Comstock, 23 years old, from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Comstock had joined the 56th in the summer of 1944, and had acquitted himself well enough in escort missions over Germany that his squadron commander, Major Leroy Schreiber, had begun assigning him to the more demanding forward positions in their combat formations, the spots that screened the bombers from the first wave of German interceptors. On the morning of October 15th, Comstock took off from Boxted as part of a 16-ship escort element assigned to cover B-17s striking a synthetic oil plant near Cologne. The mission looked routine on the briefing board. It would not remain routine past the Dutch border. To understand what Comstock did, you need to understand in precise technical terms what he was flying and what the Luftwaffe was flying against him. The P-47D Thunderbolt was, by the autumn of 1944, a mature combat aircraft. It weighed nearly 8 tons, fully loaded, heavier than any single-engine fighter on either side. Its R-2800 engine produced 2,300 horsepower at military power settings, and it carried 8 or 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, with 425 rounds per gun. This is not a vague generality. Those numbers matter because of what they meant in a turning engagement. The Thunderbolt was not a nimble aircraft. German pilots knew this. Their doctrine against the P-47 was explicit: force a low-altitude turning fight. Deny the American the energy he needed to use the aircraft's superb dive speed, drag him down to where the Focke-Wulf 190 or the Messerschmitt 109 held the advantage. The Luftwaffe's interceptor doctrine in the fall of 1944 had been formalized into a training document, Jagdwaffe Taktische Vorschrift, the tactical regulations document that specifically addressed engagement geometry against American escort fighters. Attack from altitude, from the 6 o'clock position, convert to a climbing turn after the pass, and do not extend the engagement. Hit and disengage. The German pilots they were facing on October 15th had read that document. Some of them had written it. What the doctrine did not fully account for was what the R-2800 Double Wasp could do when it was damaged. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 was an 18-cylinder twin-row radial engine, air-cooled, rated for operation with individual cylinders destroyed, with oil pressure fluctuating, with cowling panels missing. Pratt & Whitney's own engineering records preserved in the company's archives in East Hartford, Connecticut document that the R-2800 was tested to continue producing meaningful power output with as many as half its cylinders rendered inoperative. This was not an accident of design. It was the result of specific engineering choices made in 1939 and 1940, when Pratt & Whitney's chief engineer, Leonard Hobbs, pushed for a lubrication and ignition architecture that would isolate cylinder failures rather than allow them to cascade. The engine could be hurt and keep flying. The Luftwaffe's tactical doctrine had no provision for an aircraft that absorbed cannon fire, lost an engine cylinder, began trailing smoke, and then refused to behave like a wounded aircraft. At approximately 11:47 in the morning, west of Cologne, Comstock's Element was bounced by a flight of Focke-Wulf 190A8s from JG-26 Jagdgeschwader 26, the Abbeville Boys, one of the most storied fighter units in the entire Luftwaffe. The attack was textbook: high, fast, from the rear quarter. Comstock's wingman called it out barely in time. A single 20mm cannon round struck the cowling of Comstock's P-47, destroying 2 cylinders in the front row of the R-2800, and punching a hole in the cowling that began venting oil smoke at a rate that, from outside the aircraft, made the Thunderbolt appear to be on fire and moments from going in. His airspeed dropped. His manifold pressure fluctuated. The R-2800, exactly as Leonard Hobbs had designed it, kept producing power. Irregular, rough, vibrating power. But power. Comstock did not bail out. He did not radio that he was hit. He turned into the attack, and this is where the story that the history books never fully tell you begins. But the most extraordinary part of what happened next comes 40 minutes later, when a German flight controller writes something in his operational log that no one has ever quoted in full. The first Focke-Wulf 190 that attacked Comstock overshot. This was partly surprised the P-47 had slowed so dramatically after taking the hit that the attacking German pilot, anticipating the aircraft's energy state, led his gunnery solution too aggressively and flew through the engagement window without a second effective burst. Comstock, now low on airspeed but with the throttle firewalled, used the Thunderbolt's one undeniable advantage at close range: 8 guns firing simultaneously. The weight of fire from 425 rounds per gun across 8 barrels, produced a density of projectiles that required no deflection shooting genius. It required the target to be in front of you and the trigger to be depressed. The first FW-190 flew through that wall of 50 caliber fire and came out the other side without its engine. Its pilot bailed out near Euskirchen. The second aircraft records indicate it was flown by Unteroffizier Karl-Heinz Fischer, 19 years old, on his 8th combat mission, came in from the left quarter, attempting to execute the standard follow on attack that JG-26's doctrine prescribed after the lead element made its pass. Comstock had no wingman. His partner had broken right during the initial bounce, and radio contact was broken. He was alone, trailing smoke over Germany, with 3 undamaged Focke-Wulfs still in the fight. Fischer's pass was better. A short burst from his 20mm cannon raked the Thunderbolt's left wing root, damaging the inboard gun and cutting a hydraulic line. Comstock's landing gear warning light flickered on and off. He pulled into a hard right turn, cutting across Fischer's flight path at an angle the younger German pilot had not anticipated, and fired a 2-second burst that caught Fischer's aircraft across the engine cowling and propeller hub. The FW-190's BMW 801 engine, unlike the R2800, was not designed with the same cylinder isolation characteristics. Fischer's engine stopped. He glided toward a forced landing in a field outside Dresden and walked away from the aircraft, a fact confirmed in his subsequent Luftwaffe personnel record. The third and fourth aircraft that Comstock destroyed were engaged in a span of approximately 4 minutes at altitudes between 4,000 and 8,000 feet, during a running engagement that took his damaged Thunderbolt across 30 miles of German airspace. The mission debrief, recorded verbatim by the 56th Fighter Group's intelligence officer, Captain Gerald Johnson, no relation to the ace of the same name, uses the word methodical to describe Comstock's gunnery. Not aggressive, not desperate. Methodical. An aircraft that should not have been flying was being flown with precision. The R2800 had lost, by the intelligence officer's post-mission assessment based on the returning aircraft's condition, the equivalent of 4 full cylinders. It was producing, at best, 60% of its rated power. And Comstock had used that 60% to shoot down 4 enemy fighters. He crossed the Dutch coast at low altitude, fuel state critical, hydraulics degraded, with an aircraft that the 56th's ground crew chief, Technical Sergeant Anthony Marchetti, would later describe in a letter home, a letter preserved in a private collection, as looking like someone had taken a tin can opener to the whole front half of the ship. He landed at an emergency strip near Ghent, Belgium. He refueled. He flew home to Boxted. He filed his debrief. And then, in the way that institutional processes sometimes swallow singular events, the account was processed through channels, credited, recorded, and filed in a manner that ensured it would not surface in the summaries that went to the press, to the public affairs officers, to the journalists who covered the air war. Now we come to what the enemy's own records said, and this is the part of the story that primary sources make impossible to dismiss. The operational log of the Luftwaffe sector control at Glenwan Airfield for October 15, 1944. Was captured by American forces in April 1945 and translated by the Army's Military Intelligence Service. That translation survives in Record Group 243 at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. The entry for the engagement that involved Comstock identified in the German record only by the notation Schwer bestätigte P-47. A heavily damaged P-47 contains a summary that the sector controller, compiled from pilot radio transmissions and post-mission debriefs. He describes 4 aircraft lost to what he characterizes in the German text as an unbeweisbar enemy, a word that translates with meaningful precision as not to be turned away. Not difficult, not skilled, not even dangerous in the conventional sense, not to be turned away. The aircraft should have been finished. It was not finished. It continued. The German controller, trained in a system that prized mathematical precision in combat assessment, had no tactical category for what he had observed. He wrote unabwisbar and moved to the next entry. Post-war interrogation records, specifically the transcripts from the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center, held at the Imperial War Museum in London, include the debrief of Hauptmann Werner Mortiz, a JG-26 flight leader who had not been directly involved in the Comstock engagement, but who had spoken to pilots who were. His comment, recorded by a British interrogating officer on March 3, 1945, was characteristically spare. He said, and this is the translation as rendered by the CS-DIC officer, "The Americans built engines that did not understand they were supposed to stop." He was not speaking abstractly. He had been told by his own pilots about the smoking P-47 that would not go down. He was describing, in 8 words, a specific engineering reality that Pratt & Whitney's Leonard Hobbs had built into the R-2800 half a decade earlier. The enemy had encountered it. The enemy had named it. And the enemy's naming of it tells you more about what that engine meant than any Allied press release ever did. The German fighter pilots who survived encounters with battle-damaged American aircraft in the late war period consistently reported the same impossible thing. Aircraft that by all visible evidence should have disintegrated, kept fighting, kept flying, and kept shooting. This was not luck repeated endlessly. It was design. The American industrial and engineering system had produced, across multiple platforms, a philosophy of redundancy and damage tolerance that the Luftwaffe stretched thin, short on raw materials. Building aircraft to be effective rather than survivable had not matched, and by 1944 could not match. Hal Comstock's 7 minutes over Western Germany on October 15, 1944, were not an accident. They were the logical consequence of 10,000 engineering decisions made by 10,000 people who never knew their names, would never appear in a history book. What this story finally reveals is not just the courage of one pilot, extraordinary as that courage was. What it reveals is the depth of the Allied advantage, an advantage that operated at levels the enemy could observe but could not fully explain. The Germans could see that the P-47 kept flying. They could not see Leonard Hobbs at his drafting table in East Hartford. They could see that the American pilot kept shooting. They could not see the production lines at Curtiss-Wright and Republic Aviation, the quality control systems, the logistical chains that ensured that the guns did not jam and the ammunition did not fail. The enemy's shock was real, and it was documented, and it was the shock of an adversary who understood the surface of what they were facing but could not penetrate to the system underneath. Hal Comstock was credited with 4 aerial victories on October 15, 1944. He survived the war. He returned to Kalamazoo, Michigan. He did not become famous. The 56 fighter group's total victory count, by war's end, exceeded 1,000 aerial kills, the highest of any fighter group in the 8th Air Force. Comstock's 4 on that day are a line in a ledger. They are also, if you know what to look for in the German records, the 4 aircraft that made a Luftwaffe controller reach for a word that admitted, quietly and precisely, that what he had seen was not to be turned away. If you want to know what the Luftwaffe said about the P-47's gun systems, why German pilots specifically debriefed on the .50 caliber's performance compared to their own cannons, and what their post-war assessments revealed about the weapon they feared most, that video is next. Subscribe. Every video goes deeper than the last.